probably the most, I don't know.
The biggest, the fattest.
Yeah. He's one of the best art historians among young colleagues that I know. So for me, it's a real honor and a pleasure to have him on our at our conference. His talk will be is entitled References on the Art of Medieval Transylvania, 1450, an overview of recently discovered or used sources. Please.
Okay, thank you very much, Margarita. And please notice that there is a slight change in the title. I will explain a bit later. So, of course, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting and accepting my proposal for the current edition of Art Readings, and especially to Margarita Kuyumjieva, a great scholar and a very dear friend. Also, I would like to thank in absentia Ivan Biliaski, the one who generously revealed us, to my wife and me, Bulgaria and Sofia, and we owe him much of our present-day attraction for this country, which is also a personal enrichment. The theme proposed for this meeting, Art and Archives, is indeed very generous, and in many ways it suits me well, as I am an art historian much concerned about the documentary sources referring to art. Some of my colleagues might argue even I was more concerned about the sources than the beauty of the artworks themselves. And in some cases, this critique is true. For this specific meeting, however, I hope that it could turn into an asset rather than a weakness of my research. The talk today will focus on the use of different sources converging in the research of the history of art, and especially on art produced in or for Transylvania. In regions with relatively small amounts of documentary sources, Transylvania included, the research must rely on different categories of material, both written and visual. The artworks themselves and their style or formal qualities must be cross-referred with any available evidence, from lapidary or extensive text to artist signatures, monograms, different inscriptions, heraldic devices, donor portraits of other personal insignia, graffiti, etc., etc. And of course, as Nenad Makielewicz showed us yesterday, they must be considered in well-researched and refined contexts. Certainly, today I shall concentrate on the contribution of the archival finds in the knowledge of Transylvanian art. And doing so, I shall rely mainly on personal discoveries or the ones I was involved in. However, I would like to make here a disclaimer. A pure-blood historian is much more acquainted with the rather stifling air of the archives. I have to confess, I took more advantage on the digitalized versions of the documents. In a way, this is a loss, as one can miss some important details neglected by the more or less qualitative scans. But in many respects, this may provide a huge advantage. The register displayed in this slide, containing the protocols of the deanery of Sibiu, Hermannstadt, between 1523-1540, was accessed 18 times between 1967 and 2014. I must have opened it several dozens of times since my colleague Adinel Dincă photographed it for research, and since it was uploaded in the Arhiva Medievală, a large database of written sources until 1600, to be found in the National Archives of Romania. Thus, my research owes a lot to digital archives such as Arhiva Medievală, Hungaricana, Monasterium.net, endangered archives of the British Library, etc. One may notice that the title of my presentation is slightly different than the one in the program. The attribute medieval was changed to old and the time frame was deleted. This is due to a very recent discovery I would like to share with you here for the first time. The dating of these finds places it at the beginning of the 18th century, thus explaining the new title. It will be the last case study of this presentation. The main condition for a written piece of paper to become a historical document, a source for historical reconstruction, is to meet with the expertise of the historian, the only one that can assess and recognize the value of the information contained by that sheet of paper, or parchment, or papyrus. I saw many such pages as suggested, most of them scanned or photographed, but I can hardly boast myself with a few privileged such meetings. In the next minutes, I shall share with you some of those meetings. I'm sure that I missed much more that I could recognize as valuable source, but that is why we are colleagues. Having different specialization, we can complete each other in order to enjoy a broader picture. Let us begin our survey in a digitized archive related to the Evangelic Deanery of Brasov, already mentioned, included in the project Endangered Archives of the British Library. A calendar printed in Wittenberg in 1559 will offer us a bunch of pretexts for excursions in different aspects of Transylvanian art at the dawn of the modern era, but also in the medieval past. That calendar belonged to and was filled with the records of a certain Andreas Fritzmann, fashioned as Irenaeus, a parish priest of Transylvanian Saxons, of a Transylvanian Saxon village in the district of Bistrica. Bistrica located in the northeastern part of Transylvania near Moldavia. Andreas functioned a long time, more than 4 decades, as minister of this village, and in the time he added a lot of personal notes in the calendar, mixed with other records that demonstrates a genuine encyclopedic curiosity and a large cultural horizon. All this knowledge has been acquired within the province in parochial schools, as we know for sure that he never attended university abroad, as many other of his fellows in the neighborhood parishes. He entered the parish appointed by the town council of Bistrica and the parishioners as patrons of the church in May 1557 on the feast day of the Ascension. Among the many records of his other deeds, of his or others' deeds, in the day corresponding to 17th of September, the year 1566, he mentioned the founding of the bell tower of his church. This tower still survived, incisively modified in subsequent period and now in an Orthodox church as a consequence of mass immigration of ethnic Germans, and it still bears the year 1567, which records the completion of the tower's construction. Apparently, Andreas Irenaeus had a model, and he emulated the example of a neighbor. The village near Budacu was Jelna, Zendorf, a slightly larger community, and its parish priest in that time of Andreas was a certain Laurentius Klein from Bistrica, a very learned man who was requested by the superintendent of the Evangelic Church of Transylvania to participate in disputes against confessional adversaries. Laurentius was mentioned often too in the diary of Andreas in many instances. Andreas was referring to him by designing a kind of complicated monogram. This monogram is still to be seen on the bell tower of the church in Jelna, alongside an inscription of foundation mentioning the year 1560, the monogram of the parish priest, and the full name of the gremio meaning a kind of local judge. We would have only guessed that the monogram could have referred to Laurentius, but the calendar of Andreas Irenaeus makes it crystal clear. It happens that we know even more details about the foundation of the bell tower in Jelna. This small and apparently unimportant church, which in the 1980s was still intact, but in less than a decade became almost ruined due to total lack of public or communal interest, may be in fact a very famous for at least 2 reasons. One, is the identification, the recent identification of the iconography of the mural painting on the sanctuary as provincial replica of Navicella made by Giotto in the atrium of Old St. Peter in Rome. This identification, made a decade ago by Hungarian colleagues, is now tardy because the painting almost entirely disappeared. But it speaks on the one side about the dedication of the church consecrated to St. Peter, and to the other on the phenomenon of pilgrimage which had followed until such remote Transylvanian regions. A second reason for the ruin in Jelna to be well known is related to a documentary source that fortunately survived: the old book of accounts of the parish. This book is one of the most extensive and well-preserved such parochial register of medieval Transylvania, covering a period between 1455 and 1566. In 200 pages, densely written, we find a lot of details about the parochial functioning, the assets of the church, inventory of goods, relics, equipment, small biographies or autobiographies, biographies of parish priests, as well as records of building and artworks commissioned for the church in Jelna. Now, returning to the bell tower of the church, from the book of accounts, we know that it costed 50 florins in cash, but the village got involved by ensuring the free transport of material under the guidance of the aforementioned parish priest Laurentius Klein from Bistrița. When the judge was Stefanus Schwarz, in the inscription, I remember you, it was fashioned as nigger, and the Vitricus Ecclesiae or church warden was Servatius Schemmel. The Valah Matei Ghirle from a neighboring Romanian village, Bârgău, is also mentioned by name, and he contributed by supplying transports of stones, free transports of stones. In the next year, 1561, the tower was endowed with a clock, which costed more than 2 times the tower itself. Such degree of details is relatively seldom to be found in Transylvania, Transylvanian old art history. The Book of Accounts, as suggested, contained more information about art commissioned for the church. For example, we find out that in 1516, the parish priest paid a large sum of 140 florins, thus almost 3 times the cost of the tower, to a certain Dominus Gabriel for an image of Saint Peter, ut faciat imaginem Sancti Petri. The image was much probably an altarpiece sculpted and painted alike. The high cost recommend as such, designed for the main altar, as the church and the main altar was dedicated to Saint Peter. The altarpiece is now lost. Dominus Gabriel was no other than a certain Gabriel Pictor et Sculptor, citizen of Bistrița, whose life and activity between about 1505-1530 can be reconstructed due to a large quantity of archival data, mainly inedited and mostly regarding municipal tax records, municipal tax records. In several pages, I put the data contained in those tax registers. According to these records, Gabriel was one of the wealthiest citizens of the town, paying the second highest tax on property. Even though a lot of archival data concerning this artist is available, actually we have no artwork attributed to him, as long as the vast majority of figurative religious art of the district of Bistrița has been destroyed at the Reformation, roughly in the 1550s. Thus, we have very rich archival sources, but almost no actual art. There is a possibility that Gabriel Sculptor et Pictor was the author of a remarkable ensemble, still intact, but in another part of Transylvania, in southern part of Transylvania, in Sebeș. This ensemble is to be dated between November 1523 and August 1526. The beginning of the time frame is defined by an event recorded also in the calendar of Andreas Fritzmann. A huge earthquake struck Transylvania in November 1523. In the case of the Church of Sebeș, we know that the easternmost piers of the magnificent hall choir, built in the 1370s, collapsed and destroyed the altar and the altarpiece beneath. The choir vault was rebuilt and a new Renaissance altarpiece, both carved and painted, was crafted before the death of King Louis II Jagiello at the battlefield of Mohacs in August 1526, as his coat of arms is displayed on the altarpiece. We also know from documentary sources that Gabriel, sculptor and painter from Bistrița, was in the town of Sebeș in June 1526, so in the moment the altarpiece was created. But there is no certain evidence that his business there was the altarpiece itself. This still remains a hypothesis to be proved or rejected by future evidence. Some other churches have also reconstructed vaults in November 1523. I show here just one case. I discuss and I identify the patron, the monumental hall church in Moșna, built in 1490s by prominent personality, the parish priest and canon of the Cathedral of Alba Iulia, soon to become parish priest of Sibiu, Hermannstadt, who was also affected by the earthquake, as demonstrated by the keystone of the choir, dated 1525. The patron of the reconstruction was the nephew of Johannes of Olzna, Alexander, doctor in both canon and civil law. I could establish the familial connection between the two by heraldic analysis and by discovering an unknown charter. Let us go back on to the town of Bistrița. As suggested by numerous archival sources, it was an active artistic center in the 15th, 16th centuries. Although, as already mentioned, there is almost no artwork preserved. At least 10 painters are documented by different sources between about 1475 and 5050. A confirmation to such an artistic development is provided by a very special document I identified and published a decade ago. With the invaluable help of a colleague, paleographer and medievalist Adinel Dincă. The guild regulation of the painters, sculptors, joiners, and glaziers approved in 1549 by the municipality of Bistrița. By its publication, it became the fourth known and edited statute from Transylvania. The first, and also a model for the others, was issued in Sibiu, Hermannstadt, in 1520. Brașov, another important town of Transylvania, adopted the model in 1523 and made a new regulation in 1532. The one in Bistrița became thus the fourth. It was supposed, but it has not actually had been positively demonstrated before, that such a guild must have existed in the large town of Cluj too. However, a new archival discovery made it very clear, in a most unusual way. The source, published in the last year with the help of another paleographer, Andreea Mârza, is one of my favorite documentary evidence I encountered in my quests. It represents an extensively judicial record of 1549, almost 200 lines long, triggered by the death of a painter, Gregorius, citizen of Cluj, who died without direct heirs, leaving behind just his widowed wife. A bunch of alleged relatives appear to inherit the deceased painter, and the widow opposed to them. This conducted to a trial, which was in fact the effort of the authorities to discover the origin of the painter and to establish if the petitioners had the right to the inheritance. Making a long story short, I will stress only upon a few details, some of them really juicy. A first thing to underline is that a part of the inquiry was made among Gregory's fellow painters. 4 members of the craft have been interviewed, and they stated the existence of the guild under the name of Ceha or Contubernium Magistrorum Pictorum. The membership was obtained not only by providing that a candidate could execute a Meisterstück or masterpiece, but also by presenting a certificate of honorable birth. This was a common request of guilds all over Europe, Transylvania included, that the artisan to become master had to prove by a written document that he was born in an honorable Christian family. Such a demand would exclude from the trade those with genealogical issues or inappropriate religious or confessional affiliation. This particular prerequisite of the craft was not fulfilled by Gregorius, unable to present a littera genealogiae, a certificate to his defense. The master of the guild repeatedly asked for it. Under pressure, Gregorius gave different answers to the question. Where are you from? Some quoted the answer, not from that wood, neither from that stone. Or, I do not know, I may be the son of a priest, or the son of a Valachian. Thus I cannot find any kindred or relatives. In the 16th century's Cluj, such origins would have been considered by the social establishment unhealthy backgrounds. Both extraction from a parish father or from an Orthodox Valachian or Romanian would have been considerably highly inappropriate by the Painters Guild. But nevertheless, it could have been partially or even totally true. When he became overwhelmed, he gave even more scandalous answers. To the same repeated questions, unde ergo est tu? The playful painter replied, laughing, I am from the hairy fountain, or spring, de piloso fonte sum, an elusive but quite transparent reference to his maternal origin. To be even clearer, the witness reproduced the expression in Hungarian language, his and undoubtedly also Gregorius' maternal tongue, in sermone ungarico zörkuty vagyok. This is in Hungarian. Until the discovery of this document, we had almost no evidence of painters active in Cluj in the first half of the 16th century, especially since any material trace of their craft disappeared with the Reformation. Quite radical in that town. Without the trial records, luckily preserved in the archives, Gregorius' picture would have never existed for us at all. In the fortunate case when Transylvanian artworks of the mentioned period survived, and this occurs especially in centers as Sighișoara, Sibiu, and some villages around Brașov, they usually demonstrate a close affinity to the art of Nuremberg, of Albrecht Dürer and his followers. I think this is not by accident that in the day of the great artist's death was commemorated in the calendar of the same Andreas Irenaeus, about 3 decades after its actual occurrence. In Transylvania, his oeuvre seemed to have been highly appraised. I shall invoke here only one example. In the painted composition of a small pala altarpiece commissioned in 1519-1520 by a learned clergyman, a trained eye can recognize at least the use of at least 9 different prints belonging to Dürer and maybe to one of his direct pupils, Hans Leonhard Schäufelin. The models transferred also to the silverware. As one can notice on the communion mark created in the town of Brașov, a century after was created its easily recognizable model, the flagellation from the celebrated Kupferstich Passion series. The cross-medial transfers from print to panel, from print to mural painting, or from print to silverware have been often mediated by books of models. We do not possess any Transylvanian Gothic of Renaissance painter's book of models, though there are several belonging to goldsmiths. One such book was recently published by our colleague Agnes and Frank Ziegler and represented a remarkable document indeed. It contains, besides the personal drawing of a goldsmith, Paulo Schirmer, a plethora of prints, 97, engravings, woodcuts, etchings, etc., belonging to many different masters, from Master A.S., Martin Schongauer, Israel van Meckenem, Albrecht Dürer, Bartel Beham, Nicolas de Bruyne, Virgil Solis, etc. The prints are trimmed, often split into many fragments, and are stained and damaged, indicating an extensive use. It is not excluded that some of the prints have been initially in the possession of painters, before they entered the book of models of Goldsmith's family. Finally, the last example discussed here is also the one which determined the small changing the presentation title. For reasons that will become soon obvious, it is related to the impressive Vauban fortress constructed in the first half of the 18th century in Alba Iulia. What concerns us here mostly is the attribution of the extensive sculpture decoration that appears on the 4 4 of the 6 gates and on the pointed ends of the bastion, as we shall see, the common attribution is erroneous. Alba Iulia fortress or Karlsburg was the monumental symbol of the conquest of Transylvania by the Habsburg Empire between about 1689-1711 and of its domination afterwards. One of the most remarkable and modern strongholds built in the course of the Habsburg offensive against the Ottoman after the siege of Vienna in 1683, Alba Iulia fortress was raised between 1715 and 1727 under direct orders of Eugen of Savoy by Italian architects and military buildings masters such as Giovanni Morando Visconti, Francesco Brilli, and Giuseppe di Quadro. Moreover, the huge masses of bricks masonry were added a veritable sculpted iconographic program. The gates, initially designed in a simple manner, have been reshaped in order to accommodate the mentioned iconographic program conceived around the theme of the triumph of the Emperor Charles VI. Turcomachia and Victoria Christiana, the victory of the Christians against enemies and heathen Ottomans. The decoration was since 1930s until today attributed to the Bavarian sculptor Johann König. I quote, other images, yes. I quote from the most recent treatise of art history in Romania, published in 2018. The largest ensemble of military architecture which received a special attention was the Alba Carolina fortress in Alba Iulia, built in the old capital of the Principality at the initiative of Eugen of Savoy in the Vauban style in 1714-1738, here, under the direction of Italian architect Giovanni Morando. The monumental and festive aspect, emphasized by the abundance of decoration, characteristic of the Baroque style, is conferred by the gates of the fortress, 4 of which are adorned with reliefs and stone statues made by the Bavarian sculptor Johann König. The vast figurative plastic construction site active at the fortress in Alba Iulia in the first decades of the 18th century constituted a model that influenced and stimulated the development and propagation of Baroque sculpture in Transylvania. And also in the work of one of the best specialists of Transylvanian Baroque, Nicolae Sabău, the same attribution is publicized. At the basis of this attribution lay a documentary source interpreted in a subjective manner. In a census of the municipality of Cluj of 1727, one can discover the name of a certain Johannes König, sculptor originating from the Bavarian town of Cham, who came in 1717 in Transylvania, sent by imperial authorities from Vienna to the building site of the fortress in Alba Iulia. After 3 years, thus in 1720, he established himself in Cluj, where he was living happily from his craft. The scholarly literature attributed him the sculptures of the gates in Alba Iulia, I showed you before, as well as the sculpture of the Jesuit church in Cluj, constructed between 1718 and 1724. One problem with the attribution of sculptures in Alba Iulia to Johann König is that the bulk of the job was done after 1720, the moment when König left Alba Iulia for Cluj. And also that there is another artwork which is extremely similar to the sculpture of Alba Iulia, located in Sibiu, in the Franciscan church and dated in 1722 or later, which was never attributed to König, as long as he was certainly active in Cluj in that moment. This artwork is the funerary monument of Damian Hugo von Virmont, a general of the Habsburg Empire deceased in 1722. According to the same specialist in Baroque, Nicolae Sabău, the epitaph certainly belongs to the workshop or to a magister statuarius who worked on the sculpture site of the Alba Iulia fortress. However, Sabău himself restrained himself to attribute this artwork to the celebrated sculptor König. I had the privileged opportunity to come across a document to bring light upon this matter. It is preserved in a digitalized archive where apparently it has no reason to be. In a miscellaneous register belonging to the deanery of Brasov, among many documents, list of parish priests, diary notes, testaments, etc., there is a receipt according to which a payment of 150 florins was made to a scultore bearing an Italian name, Giuseppe Tencala. The payment made by Gubernial Secretary Samuel Colescheri was exactly for the monument of Damian Hugo von Virmont. By lines recording that, the payment made by the Gubernial Secretary Samuel Colescheri was exactly for the monument of Virmont. Here you have the transcription. And this we know for sure that the Gubernial Secretary was in charge of the monument from the monument itself. This gubernial secretary was one of the very prestigious and enlightened men, authoring several treatises, among which is the celebrated Auraria Romano-Dacica. Sorry. Giuseppe Tencala was not totally unknown. There is another receipt made 5 years earlier, exactly in Alba Iulia, where he executed 4 statues for the altar of Carlo Borromeo for the Bishop of Alba Iulia, who recently recovered his church from the Protestants with the support of the Catholic Habsburgs. The statues have not survived, and Tencala was ignored or considered an employee of Johann König and on the building site of the fortress. The certain attribution of the site to or the epitaph von Virmont demonstrate instead that it was the other way around. Tencala was the mastermind and the coordinator of the sculpture program, which was extended almost a decade after Johann König left the place for Cluj. And here you have very briefly a similarity between the monument in Sibiu and Alba Iulia. There are clear evidence that the style is the same. So Giuseppe Tencala was the sculptor, not Johann König. So in this very recent archival finding and the stylistic analysis identify the author of the sculpted decoration of the monumental gates of Alba Iulia in the person of Giuseppe Tencala, and therefore dismisses the previous attribution to Johann König. Tencala family was very well known from a very well known family from Ticino, Bissone region. We have many members of this family active in all over Europe. So I end here my presentation, and with that conclusion, considering the piece of archival evidence cited in this talk, one may think that I would have taken many decades to achieve such a harvest. In fact, this isn't quite true. I'm a lazy researcher profiting largely from the technological advance and of the new digital instruments. I hope this is the access of our sources that makes art history even more appealing for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Virea, for this blissful beginning of our part today. Now we will proceed with the first session, and I invite our moderators to take their seats.
Good morning, everyone. I am the good cop of video and the bad cop era. So we are in charge of the first session. I'm kidding, we are both bad cops this morning. We are going to be in charge of the first session. And it is our pleasure and privilege to give the word and the floor to Lidia Kotovano from the Nicolae Iorga Institute of History of the Romanian Academy in Bucharest, and to Grigoris Manopoulos from the Democritus University of Thrace. They will present by intermediary of Grigoris, by the painter's brush and the scribe's pen, printed images and archival testimonies in 17th century Balkans.
Hello, everybody. We would like to thank the organizers for yet one more year having us here. We hope. Our presentation this year is connected to and is actually an expansion of the last year's one. In the previous conference, we dealt with an icon and the family of its donor, Evstathios Alfanzis. This year, we will examine more donors' portraits under the light of archival evidence in combination with the inscriptions, who usually are our only source of information on the depicted persons. For time, we will restrict ourselves in the 17th century, but obviously this kind of combined study can expand in the previous and following centuries. Our first representation of donors dates from 1602 and comes from the Stauropigial monastery of Sosinu, near Pogdoriani in Epirus of Greece. From the overpainted inscription, we learned that in 1838, the colors of the frescoes were renewed, but the original arrangement and design were not disturbed. So, in the composition, 3 figures are identified by inscriptions. First, from left, is Ioannis Kondaratos, Epitropos, which means administrator, that according to the inscription, built the foundations of the church and the monastery. Then comes Manuel Kondaratos, probably a brother of the previous one, and as attested, new founder of the monastery and the church. And last, to the right, is Kiritsis, which is kind of a title, Ioannakis Simotas, which is called Great Founder. The last two hold a depiction of the church between them. As the surviving sources show, the founder of the monastery was actually Ioannakis Simotas, which is called Great Founder, a prominent merchant in the Danubian principalities in the last quarter of the 16th century that had founded the monastery in 1598. Manuel Kondaratos was apparently the donator of the frescoes or even the completion of the monastery that took place in 1602, and his brother Ioannis Kondaratos was probably the administrator of the last donation. However, the depiction of the Kondaratos brothers, together with the great founder Simotas, who probably died around 1600, led to the condemnation of their act of painting themselves in the church by the Patriarch a little after the painting of the portraits. However things happened, we have here the practice of depicting persons who are not present. So the painter has not seen them, or they're not posing for him, but have benefited the ecclesiastical institution in an earlier time. The next founder was also connected with the Danubian principalities. This is Nikas from Frastana in Pogoni of Epirus, or Nika from Korkova, as is known as he was known in the Danubian principalities. An abundance of information is revealed to us through research in the Romanian archives. He appeared in Wallachia from 1585, initially occupying various military positions. After getting married with the widowed mother of the future prince Radu Sherban, he rose to the rank of great treasurer, and finally in 1611 to the rank of great logothetis, a kind of prime minister, thanks of course to his adopted son being the prince. This was very convenient. After his wife died, he married Pagouno, first cousin of another prince, Mihnia Turcitul, and it is that with this new family of his, he is depicted in the monastic church of St. John the Baptist that he built in his village of origin in Epirus. He is depicted holding a model of the church and wearing valuable garments befitting his position. Next to him is his wife, Pagouno, and on the other side, his son, Predas, who later followed the career in the lower aristocracy of the principalities, but who soon covered in debt and sold little by little his father's property to avoid imprisonment. The princely attire of his daughter Maria, you can see it here, with a crown, jewels, and the red dress decorated with lace, embroidery, and double-headed eagles is impressive, as she was married to a nephew of the wife of the already mentioned Prince Mihnea Turcitul. The impressive composition, dated in 1613 or 14, was probably commissioned on the occasion of his daughter's engagement, which took place a little earlier. Georgios and his son Constantinos are depicted in votive paintings in two monasteries located in quite a distance from each other. The first one is the patriarchal Staropygion monastery of the Virgin in their village of origin, called Vlasi in Agrafa of today's Greece, that was built around 1639 and painted in 1643 or 44. And the second is the patriarchal Staropygion monastery of Bachkovo in Bulgaria, for which they financed the painting of the narthex in the same year, 1643-1644. Something obviously happened to them that year, and they were feeling the urge to do this combined donations. In both cases, especially the second, the father and son are depicted wearing rich garments, suggesting their status in the economic elite of the time. As revealed by a patriarchal document from 1782, their family name was Grammatikos. The maternal grandfather, Grammatikos, and as like others from their village, they were Cheleps, meaning they were in the ship trading business. For example, a close relative of Georgios was Skarlatos Grammatikos, the maternal grandfather of the famous great dragoman of the port, Alexandros Mavrokordatos, the Exaporiton, the one who knows the Sultan's secrets. Skarlatos was also a Chelep, and he also founded the well-known Tatarna monastery in the southern Agrafa, close to the village of Vlasi that we talked about. Skarlatos' nephews and Georgios Grammatikos, the one in the donor portrait, are mentioned together in an edict of Prince Vasile Lupu from 1650 concerning land owned by them in Moldavia. It is of no surprise then that the descendants of Georgios Grammatikos from his granddaughter and under the new surname Slujaris, the Romanians probably know what this means, it's a title in the Danubian principalities, made a career in the court of Wallachia under the princes Constantin Brancovanu and the Mavrokordats, as revealed in the patriarchal document of 1782, and of course several Wallachian documents of the time. As is evident from the Grammatikos case, the relations with the principalities were a common goal for the Christians of the Ottoman Empire that were pursuing financial and socio-political success. Such is the case of the merchants from Pogoniani, a small region of Epirus in today's Greece, who already from the 16th century were conducting commerce and participating in the administration there, the principalities. By 1541, they had managed to raise their area into an archbishopric and therefore connected directly to the patriarchate. And in the year 7096, which is from September 1587 till August 1588, a new cathedral was built, a cross and square domed church dedicated to the Holy Apostles. High up on the outside of the northern wall towards the narthex, an inscription is found incised in stone. According to it, the founder of the church was a person named Arsenis in the inscription, who had held in his life the illustrious title of Ban in Wallachia. We know that there was only one Ban named Arsenios in Wallachia, mentioned in the surviving archival material. I'll show you one of the documents. He is some kind of judge there, I don't know. He was in office first as a great vistier, treasurer is this, I don't know, and later as Ban during the reign of Prince Peter the Young from 1559 till 1568, which surprisingly is the same period when other persons from Pogoniani were also there holding offices, like Ban Giorma or Oxiotis Aga and something like this. Although we have not any other information on him, we can assume that after the end of his career in the principalities, he decided to build the new cathedral of Pogoniani. His career must have been successful since he was the sole financier of the project. In 1645, the church was decorated with paintings that thoroughly covered the entire interior walls. On this occasion, an inscription was written above the western door of the narthex. It informs us that the church was built in 1588, like we already saw, by the already deceased Panos, son of Arseni, and that after many years, in 1645, the Honorable Panos paid for its present decoration, which was done by the painter Dimitrios from the village Gramosta and his son Ioannis Skoutaris. The information of the inscription is complemented by the donor's portraits, found on the western wall to the north of the door. Two men, identified by separate inscriptions, are depicted holding the model of the church. On the right, we see a portrait of Panos Arseniou, and on the left, the portrait of Panos Papadimitriou, son of the deceased Sakellarius. One can only hypothesize why the name of the original donor of the church was transferred mistakenly from the outside inscription. As we saw, it says Banos Arsenis. Maybe the inscription was in poor state of preservation already by 1645. Maybe the composers of the painted inscriptions could not comprehend the term Banos, ban, and they thought it reads Panos. This actually, in Greek, it's very common. Even today, when we use the accusative of a name that starts with a P, we would not say ton pano, we would say ton bano. It would sound like that. The N makes the P sound like a B. Maybe it's something like that. Although the people of Pogoniani still had close ties with the principalities, it's not normal that they would not understand what Banos is, okay? One thing is for sure, the inhabitants of Pogoniani already in 1645 had a very vague idea about who was the original donor of their cathedral. They created a name out of a title and a surname out of a name, and they even had an imaginary portrait painted. Confused as to what this Panos Arseniou was, they used for his portrait the generic term princely merchant, αυθεντικός πραγματευτής. Although such a term did not exist in the Danubian principalities, still it is very possible that it corresponds to the term friend of the prince, which was used to describe merchants that were conducting commerce for the prince and or for the state. In all probability, the new donor, Panos Papadimitriou, was responsible for all this. Eager to have his own portrait painted, he made sure he would have the original donor's portrait painted as well. Although not entirely clear from the wording of the inscriptions, Papadimitriou is not the actual surname of Panos. It is his father's name, who was the priest, Papas, Dimitrios, and also held the office of Sakellarius of the archbishopric. In this capacity, he has signed as a witness on 4 documents issued by the Archbishop of Pogoniani, Sophronius, in 1631 and 1636. He died a little later, since in the 1645 inscription he is referred to as the late Sakellarius. His son and donor of the paintings, Panos, was in all probability a merchant in Wallachia. There he was the writer and the witness of a real estate sale contract in 1634. All this document is written by Panos' hand. Here you can see his name. And actually, something I noticed yesterday, I can't go back. I noticed yesterday that probably his father taught him how to write, because if we see the father's name Dimitrios here and how he writes Dimitrios there, it's exactly, he uses the same ligatures. It's something I noticed last night, so I had to say it. Can't control myself. The Orthodox also used as a field of opportunity the market of Venice. From early on, they were conducting commerce there, and one of the most prominent ones was the well-known Panos Hieromnemon, who donated money for the completion of the frescoes of the Stauropigial monastery of Hieromeri in Epirus in 1679. Hieromnemon came from an old family of Ioannina, was born in 1616 and died in 1691. He was an important merchant and eventually banker in Venice during the 17th century, and also served as an interpreter of the Grand Vizier, a fact that places him in Constantinople as well. He had a very significant fortune, as shown by the list of his assets, which he distributed during his lifetime and after his death with his will. distributed for many benefactions and bequests and so on. In this context, his donation to the monastery of Giromeri, which being, this is his will and his signature. In this context, his donation to the monastery of Giromeri, which being a Stavropigian was controlled by the Patriarchate, is not surprising. The composition of the donor depicts the founder dressed in luxurious garments. He offers an icon of the Virgin Mary, which here represents the painted decoration, to a prelate in full attire, who in return offers the founder a cross, which here indicates the Stavropigial status of the monastery. Between them, blessed by Christ, the Catholicon is floating in mid-air, since neither of them had offered money for its erection about a century earlier. Actually, the Catholicon was built on the expenses of Oxiotis from Pogoniani. I mentioned him briefly earlier. The accompanying inscriptions make it clear that the bishop is called Parthenius and that he is a representative of the patriarch, without further details. So we don't know who exactly he is. It is likely that he was a nearby bishop. We must add that although the anonymous painter is not a very good craftsman, he nevertheless makes diligent efforts to render a composition with complex meanings. I mean, he offers the icon, which is the painting of the church. The other guy gives the cross. It has some deeper meaning. Makes diligent efforts to render a composition with complex meanings, and to a large extent he succeeds. At the same time, he tries to attribute portrait characteristics to the figures. We see here that he's not a very competent artist. But it is certain that he had never met Hieromnemon. Maybe only he met Parthenius, who would have managed the donation of Hieromnemon. As a last example, we will remind the portrait of Eustathios Alphonsis, who donated an icon to the Church of St. Demetrius near Ioannina in 1697, probably when he was beginning his commercial career. Through a great number of documents, such as the one shown here, we managed to reconstruct the history of this prominent Epirot family, the members of which were conducting commerce between Venice and the Ottoman Empire. Our donor chose to expand the family's trading network towards Wallachia as well, where he ended his life around 1731. His signatures that you can see here are all coming from documents from the Romanian archives. To conclude, through a variety of archival material, we managed to deepen our knowledge about the persons responsible for the commission of building or decorating activities in such institutions throughout the Balkans in the 17th century. As one would expect, Venice and the Danubian principalities were the places where the Orthodox could pursue a better life. We can also observe another permanent factor in the relation between merchants and their wealth and the church. This is the Patriarchate of Constantinople, which was constantly trying to attract donations of any kind in order to secure its financial survival in the Ottoman environment of the capital. Through the granting of the Stavropigial status to the monasteries, the donors would be assured that their donations were secured from local interventions, and at the same time, they would gain a foothold in the Patriarchate's administration. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And we will proceed with the next presentation, and it's a pleasure to invite here Dr. Elisabeta Negrau from Gheorghe Oprescu Institute of Art History, Romanian Academy, and her presentation entitled A Source for Post-Byzantine Art History, Letters to the Patriarch and Tsar of Russia regarding church paintings.
Thank you very much, Era. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. So my communication will present a section of the research I'm contributing with to the fourth volume of the collection Sources for Byzantine Art History, coordinated by Professor Charles Barber from Princeton University. This volume, scheduled for release the next year, will focus on the visual culture of late Byzantium and the early or modern Orthodox world, comprising the time frame between 1350s and 1669. So the collection aims to provide translations of essential Byzantine and post-Byzantine documentary sources useful for our historians. From my contribution to this volume, I will present today a group of 13 letters exchanged between Tsar Mihail Feodorovich Romanov and the voivodes of Moldavia, Miron Barnovski and Vasile Lupu. These letters detail the commissioning of Russian painters and icons for church foundations in Moldavia during the 1620s, 30s, and 40s. The letters illuminate the back and forth negotiations over workshop personnel and models that must have been a typical part of the process of securing long-distance art commissions in many parts of the Orthodox world. The first group of letters was sent in two stages, 3 in 1629 and 2 in 1636, and is valuable for the information it provides about the protocol through which icon orders were made from one country to another, and how these orders could fail when cultural differences in vision could occur. In March 16, and so the documents are useful as they show how these differences could create the disputes regarding the canonicity of the iconography of the commissioned icons, and we'll discuss further on. In March 1629, the Archimandrite Varlaam of Secu Monastery in Moldavia arrived in Moscow as an envoy sent by Voivod Miron Barnovski, the ruler of the Moldavian Principality at the time. Varlaam carried with him letters from Suceava and Kiev, 2 from Miron Barnovski addressed to Tsar Mihail Feodorovich and Patriarch Filaret Nikitic, 1 recommendation letter from Metropolitan Job Boretsky of Kiev, 1 recommendation letter from Archimandrite Peter Mogila of Pecherslavra, who was a relative of Barnovski, and 1 from Metropolitan of Moldavia, Anastasie Krimka. Of these letters, only 2 have survived. The letter from Miron Barnovski to the Tsar in original, and the letter from Peter Mogila to the Tsar and the Patriarch in a transcript. However, other internal Russian documents have also been preserved, through which we can reconstruct information about the other letters and the context in which the events took place. The first letter is a supplication from Barnovski addressed to the Tsar. The Moldavian prince proudly lists his recent religious foundations, including Dragomirna Monastery, founded by Metropolitan Anastasie Krimka, and 2 monasteries that he erected, Barnovski Church in the capital of Iași and Bârnova Monastery near Iași. He expresses his desire to acquire Muscovite icons for these churches, noting that, I quote from his letter, "The exquisite icons from the Tsar's realm beautify Orthodox churches everywhere." And in this way, he made the commitment. The Russian Tsardom will also be commemorated in the Moldavian Church, end quote. The envoy was received by the Tsar in the Kremlin. However, although Varlaam, Archimandrite Varlaam, paid for the icons, he would not receive them as they will be detained in Moscow due to a scandal regarding their alleged non-canonical iconography. A few more years will have to pass before Varlaam becomes Metropolitan of Moldavia and Vasile Lupu ascends to the throne of Moldavia, in order for the efforts to retrieve the icons left in Moscow to be resumed in 1636. However, even this time, they will not be successful. Vasile Lupu sent a letter to Tsar Mihail Feodorovich in which he expressed his desire to recuperate the icons. The letter reveals at last the subject of these icons. There were 2 icons depicting pairs of martyr saints, Saint George with Saint John the New of Suceava and Saint Procopius with Saint Mercurius. And they were displayed sitting on thrones or benches, it's not very clear, and were featuring hagiographic scenes all around. Their painter was the iconographer Nazari, who received the money, but the icons remained in his workshop, were never delivered. Our historian Elena Firea, who is today with us, suggested that their painter could have been Nazari Istonim Savin, one of the Tsar's isography, who was active in Moscow during the 1620s and 30s, and who made icons and decors for several rooms of the patriarchal palace of Filaret Nikitic in Moscow. The Tsar and the Patriarch summoned the iconographer to the ambassador's office to be questioned about the icons. The Patriarch asked the painter Nazari why about the models he used and why he depicted I quote, the saints seated on chairs. Nazari replied that he had based his work on the icon of Saint Demetrius of Thessalonica, the famous late 12th century to early 13th century icon, which he had admired in the Dormition Cathedral in Moscow. It was in Moscow at the time. According to the Russian internal documents, Patriarch Filaret consented in the end that the icons be given to the Moldavian envoys. Yet the Tsar Mikhail Feodorovich opposed this decision. The Tsar responded to Vasile Lupu in a letter that the icons could not be sent because, I quote, "Those icons were painted under the guidance of Archimandrit Varlam, not as they should have been. Therefore, they were not given to either the Archimandrit or his companions because they were painted inappropriately, in a disrespectful manner." End quote. The two icons remained in Moscow and, according to these documents, were displayed at the Kremlin in the Church of St. Sergius, and their trace was lost. Andrei Grabar and Elena Firea suggested that the depiction of Saint John the New of Suceava was venerated in Moldavia might have been contained iconographic elements with which the Russian authorities were not accustomed. Little is known about the early veneration of this saint in Russia. His vita was added to the great Menaion of the new miracle workers following the Makariev Sobors in 1547 and 49, though there are no known Russian representations of the saint prior to the 1630s. However, if the non-canonical nature of the icons were solely due to the depiction of Saint John the New, one would expect that only the icon featuring him would be retained in Russia, while the other would not. Moreover, as we are informed by the Russian documents, the whole dispute revolved around the question of why the iconographer painted the saints sitting on chairs. In my opinion, an interesting aspect has been overlooked. Representations of martyr saints depicted as a pair seated together on a throne are in fact not common, while depicting a single saint on a throne would not have seemed unusual to someone familiar with Byzantine iconography. But representations of a pair of military or martyr saints sitting together on a common chair similar to a syntronon would have appeared quite unconventional, as the syntronon was a prerogative of the apostles and the hierarchs, but no one had considered martyrs or other saints in this manner. In fact, such depictions are found particularly in Moldavia. In three frescoes at the base of the triumphal arches in the churches in Bălinești, early 16th century, and Arbore. In an illustrated manuscript from the Dragomir monastery in early 1600s. The founder of Dragomir, Metropolitan Anastasie Krimka, was renowned for his exceptional artistic taste, profound theological insights, and talent as an iconographer and miniaturist. One miniature made by Anastasie Krimka himself shows Saint John, George, and Saint John the New seated together on a throne, identical in its subject with one of the icons commissioned in Russia. In this context, it is not surprising that Miron Barnovsky requested two icons specifically with an iconography favored and used in the Moldavian milieu. This iconographic variation have emphasized the high status of the martyr saints given by God and the communion and spiritual love among the saints, and perhaps it referred also to eschatology and the Last Judgment, where the saints will also sit with the apostles and judge the people. Unfortunately, this Moldavian iconographical approach was met with suspicion in Russia and deemed non-canonical, even though it merely represented a variation of the traditional depiction of a single martyr sitting on throne. The other case that I'm going to present today is a group of 7 letters exchanged between Voivod Vasile Lupu and Tsar Mikhail Feodorovich between 1638 and 42. Lupu sought to embellish his recent foundation, Three Hierarchs Monastery in the capital of Iași, with ambitious artistic endeavors, so he requested Russian painters to execute the icons and come and work the murals of his foundation. Vasile Lupu sent a Greek envoy, Isaia, son of Eustatios, in 1638 with letters to Tsar Mikhail Feodorovich and his secretary, Fyodor Fyodorovich Likhachov. Only the letter to the secretary survived. It follows from it that Vasile needed skilled icon painters to create an iconostasis for the Three Hierarchs monastery in Iași, while also asking the secretary to mediate so that the Tsar would allow the Muscovite painters to create the iconostasis, icons, and the crucifix according, I quote, according to our Moldavian church custom. This detail is significant because it documents how the voivode gave instructions for the artists to adhere to specific characteristics of the Moldavian tradition in their painting works. But what were these Moldavian iconographic customs of which Vasile Lupu spoke about in his letter? The fact that the voivode insisted that the icons of the iconostasis and this crucifix should be made according to the customs of the Moldavian church is very significant, as the crown structure and height of the iconostasis were key differences between the Russian and the Moldavian altar iconostasis. Although Moldavia adopted the three-tiered iconostasis during the reign of the Mogila family in the late 16th and early 17th century, under the influence of the Grand Russian iconostasis, it retained certain unique features such as the mixed Ottoman and Renaissance repertoire of sculpted decoration and the modest height of the icons in the upper registers, especially when compared to the very tall decis register of the Russian iconostasis. Moreover, the richly sculpted and painted crosses for the iconostasis featuring two molenia, modeled after the Veneto-Cretan crosses painted with the crucifixion scene and adorned with gilded florons, became a common sight in Moldavia in the 1580s and beyond. Of circa 1 meter in height, these crosses were distinct from the small and rather unconspicuous crosses of the Russian iconostasis, and which could also be absent altogether. For this reason, Vasile Lupu insisted that the Tsar accept that Moldavian painters would provide to their Muscovite counterparts the model for the iconostasis cross. The execution of the icons took approximately 1 year. Later, in 1639, the first batch of icons arrived in Moldavia from Moscow, and the voivode was very pleased with them, as he conveyed in a letter to the Tsar. The remaining icons were not yet finished, and neither the mural paintings at the church. And Vasile wrote again in May 1641 to the Tsar and sent a new envoy to request 2 Muscovite painters to come to Moldavia and paint the murals of the Three Hierarchs Church. The Tsar responded and sent him 2 muralists, Sidor Pospeev and Yakov Gavrilov. Sidor Pospeev Osipov was the Tsar's second best iconographer at the time. He participated in the repainting of the Uspensky Cathedral and the Arhangelsk Cathedrals in the Kremlin. In the 1880s, at the Three Hierarchs Church in Iași began an extensive restoration conducted by the French architect Émile Lecomte de Nuit, during which the original iconostasis and the mural paintings made by the Muscovite artists were removed from the church and replaced with new ones. From the old iconostasis, only a single icon remains today, currently displayed in the monastery museum. The icon depicted the 3 hierarchs, the patron saints of the monastery, had their faces repainted later in a technique that tried to mimic naturalists, probably by a Ruthenian or Kievan painter, and was originally made in a transition style between the Stroganov school and what became later the future style of the Armory Palace workshop in the Kremlin. Of the old mural paintings, only circa 20 fragments survived, hagiographic scenes, portraits of saints, and the votive portraits, unfortunately heavily repainted as well, that reflect the influences of the transition, reflect the transition style of panel paintings practiced at the time in Moscow. In conclusion, and in line with the theme of our conference, I will argue that archival documents such as these examples of diplomatic letters that addressed artistic commissions hold significant value. They provide insights into aspects of our history from areas of which we generally lack documentation. The art commissions, how they took place, how they functioned. It proves that in the post-Byzantine East, Russia exercised a leading patronage role, employing painters and commissioning works for other state leaders that were used to strengthen the diplomatic relations between the Russian Tsardom and the neighboring countries. Envoys and embassies were involved, and the whole protocol of gifts, but also exchanges of political and military information, which these letters also contained. And I did not mention or detail here, because of the lack of time, the content of foreign politics that these letters also held. The same letters in which Vasile Lupu speaks about his commission of icons also contained latest information about the Ottoman-Persian War, for example, that he shares to the Russian Tsar. The highest ecclesiastical figures, too, played a direct role in mediating and coordinating the iconography of these commissions. However, ultimately, the final say rested with the patrons, and in these cases with the state leaders, who could request, as we saw, to the painters to adhere to local traditions and models, in this case Moldavian models, or reject a work if it did not adhere to their expected standards or supposed or established canonical requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. Now, before we proceed, the technical announcement due to serious personal reasons, Mrs. Darina Boykina will not be presenting today. Therefore, the next two papers will be done by Mateja Jerman and Vuk Dautovic, and we are moving with them into the online realm. So both of them will present from the online. So we start with Mateja Jerman from the University of Rijeka and from the Ministry of Culture and Media of the Republic of Croatia, and the topic is the apostolic visitation by Bishop of Verona Agostino Valier as a valuable resource for studying church treasuries.
The next two participants are going to be online, so,
yes.
So if you want, you can take this seat so they can see you and talk to them.
Mrs. Jerman, please.
Okay, it's everything ready, yes?
Yes, we can see.
Do you see me? Okay, hi. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry that I cannot attend this conference in person, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity to present my research through this digital platform. Because of the limited time of 15 minutes, I shall start with my presentation, with sharing your screen. Okay. Whole screen. Okay. Do you see the presentation?
Yes, it works.
Okay, great. The world of the late medieval Roman Catholic Church, from which the 16th century reformers emerged, was a complex one. Over the centuries, the Church, especially in the office of the papacy, became deeply involved in the political life of Western Europe. The resulting intrigues and political manipulations, along with the Church's growing power and wealth, led to the decline of the Church as a spiritual force. Abuses like the sale of indulgences or spiritual privileges by the clergy, along with the other allegations of corruption, undermined its spiritual authority. These instances should be regarded as exceptions, yet their occurrence was sufficient to spark controversy. There is also evidence of anti-clericalism. However, the Church on the whole retained loyalty as it had in the past. One development is clear. The political authorities increasingly sought to limit the public role of the Church, thereby triggering tension. The Council of Trent was prompted by the Protestant Reformation and has been described as an embodiment of the Counter-Reformation. It was convened between 1545 and 1563 in Trento, Italy, and was the 19th Ecumenical Council of the Catholic Church. The Council issued key statements and clarifications regarding the Church's doctrine and teachings. including scripture, the biblical canon, sacred tradition, original sin, justification, salvation, the sacraments, the Mass, and the veneration of saints. It also condemned what is defined as heresies committed by proponents of Protestantism. The Council's outcomes had notable implications for the Church's liturgy and censorship. The Council convened for 25 sessions, and its numerous decrees sought to reorganize the Catholic Church and needed to be communicated to the clergy promptly. The most efficient method to achieve this was through apostolic visitations of church dioceses, conducted by a bishop appointed by the Pope. Although variations of visitations have existed since early Christianity, they only became a mandatory activity in accordance with the Tridentine provisions. To more effectively counter the Reformation, the Church was required to enforce stricter oversight of the clergy, with the main goal of these visits being to eradicate heresy, maintain moral integrity, and promote loyalty to Catholicism. To this end, at the close of 1570, Pope Pius V sent 4 bishops to examine dioceses within the Papal States. His successor, Pope Gregory XIII, arranged visits to the remaining areas of the Papal States. Subsequently, the apostolic visitations were extended to the territories of the Italian states, including the Republic of Venice. However, post-Tridentine apostolic visitations are almost exclusively an Italian phenomenon, as attempts by the Holy See to conduct them on the territory of other European countries were unsuccessful. At that time, the Archbishop of Milan, Cardinal Carlo Borromeo, conducted 2 apostolic visitations in the dioceses of Brescia and Bergamo. Canonized in 1610, St. Carlo Borromeo was one of the most significant figures in the Counter-Reformation movement in Italy. As the nephew of Cardinal Giovanni Angelo Medici, elected Pope Pius IV, he arrived in Rome at the age of 21, where he undertook various important responsibilities. Among other achievements, he organized the final session of the Council of Trent. When the council ended, Borromeo played a key role in implementing its decrees and was one of the supervisors of the new Roman Catechism, published in 1566. For art historians, it's crucial to mention his book Instructiones Fabricae et Supellectilis Ecclesiasticae from 1577. This work contained regulations stipulating how the Church, in the spirit of the Counter-Reformation, was to change the customs regarding the design and function of sacred spaces, cemeteries, monasteries, as well as the typology of liturgical objects. These guidelines clearly outline for the first time their appearance, the suitability of the materials for manufacturing them, and their usage. Up to that point, liturgical objects were mainly shaped by stylistic trends, which frequently made their use difficult because of ornate design and decorations. 2 years after the publication of this important work, a close associate of Carlo Borromeo, the Bishop of Verona, Agostino Valier, was sent to carry out an apostolic visitation of the Venetian Stato d'Amar. The Venetian Republic initially did not approve of the new regulations from Rome, but as Bishop Valier was a member of a Venetian patrician family, the Signoria eventually allowed his visitations. They lasted several months. He spent a little over 7 months in the Dalmatian dioceses, while it took him about 3 months to visit the parts of the Istrian dioceses that were under a Venetian rule. The bishop did not travel alone. He was accompanied by numerous collaborators. All of them, under the leadership of Bishop Valier, made their first visitation to Dalmatia in 1579, and towards the end of the same year and during the first few months of 1580, they visited the dioceses in Istria. The same year, a visitation was made in Chioggia, in 1581 in Venice, and the following year in Vicenza and Padua. The apostolic visitation of Agostino Valier is held in the Archivio Apostolico Vaticano in Rome, with a partially preserved copy located in the Archivio di Stato in Verona. Only some parts of the visitation have been published, and most of the records have not yet been analyzed from an art historical perspective, but rather from a theological one. The visitation extensively examines clergy and religious life, while also incorporating valuable records of church interior inspections and inventories of their treasuries. Here is an excerpt of from Valier's visit to the Cathedral of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary in Pula, in Istria. It highlights only the parts that specifically mention liturgical items made from precious metals or various metal alloys. During his visit in 1580, Valier observed that the tabernacle held a silver pyx for the Blessed Sacrament, and he also examined the suitability of the tin containers for sacred oils. In the sacristy, he listed 2 silver pyxes, one for carrying the Blessed Sacrament, the monstrance, while the other contained several saints' relics. He counted 5 chalices, 4 of which were silver and had corresponding patens, and one was made of gilded copper, accompanied by a paten of the same material and a silver cup. Finally, he also noted 2 silver censers with an accompanying silver incense boats. Valier's descriptions of church buildings have mostly the same writing arrangement, so for almost every church he visited, it is possible to determine whether a tabernacle is present on the altar, whether all liturgical silverware is kept in the sacristy, or there is a sacristy cabinet in the choir. The listing of altar equipment varies among churches. When all altars contain the necessary items, visitor observes that everything is organized according to the established guidelines. In Pula Cathedral, Valier gave a more detailed description of the church interior. He counted 24 candlesticks on 13 altars, of which only 6 were brass and 2 were wooden, while the rest were made of iron. The main altar was lit by 4 hanging lamps, and only 4 altars had copper crosses. After noticing that some altars were missing their crosses, the visitor instructed that they be purchased. The hanging lamp and internal lights symbolizing the presence of the consecrated host are also noted. The schedule for mass services at a specific altar maintained by confraternities, religious communities, municipalities, or wealthy individuals who fund its illumination is also mentioned. Valier's inventories of movable property and sacristies include the essential liturgical objects that the church must possess according to Tridentine guidelines. Therefore, the quantity and condition of the chalices, accompanying patens, monstrances, reliquaries, censers, incense boats, holy water buckets, processional altar crosses, along with additional hanging and altar candlesticks, are detailed in the list. To illustrate the interiors of Renaissance churches in the territories under Venetian influence, particularly along the Istrian Peninsula and in Dalmatia, I'm sharing an example featuring the interior of the Venetian church of San Antonio di Castello in Venezia. Since the painting was created in 1515, that is before the Council of Trent, it is obvious that it was not decorated in accordance with its guidelines, and a similar situation was probably present in most sacred buildings in the Venetian Stato da Mare. In this context, Valier's descriptions are important because they evoke the richness of the church's liturgical equipment, including the number and appearance of altars, their painted or sculptural decorations, and the presence of altar cloths and goldsmiths' works. In the case of lacking certain liturgical equipment, Valier would determine what needed to be procured. His orders were regularly directed towards repairing existing liturgical vessels or acquiring new ones, following the recommendations in the Instrucciones of St. Carlo Borromeo. The repairs primarily involved cleaning and gilding the chalices and patens, along with repairing their damaged surfaces. The churches often lacked altar crosses, candlesticks, ciboriums for storing the host in the tabernacle, and vessels for the holy oils used in the sacraments of baptism, anointing of the sick, and confirmation. While placing orders for new vessels, the visitor recommended the materials from which they should be constructed, taking into account of the available financial resources and the significance of each individual church. Thus, in Pula, he ordered the purchase of brass or iron candlesticks, copper or brass altar crosses, and silver ciboriums, or those made of copper and then gilded. He regularly recommended that containers for holy oils be made according to the rules, specifically from tin and placed in a wooden box. The descriptions of liturgical vessels are very concise, making it largely impossible to identify a specific object from them. We can only assume that some of the few preserved Gothic chalices or monstruses were part of the church treasury at that time. In that context, only 2 reliquaries have been preserved in the Pula Cathedral, made in the period preceding Valier's visitation. However, he does not mention them. This perhaps indicates that these reliquaries were not originally part of the cathedral treasury, but were brought from another church during the 17th or 18th century. It is also possible that one of them may be connected with the description of one tabernaculum with few relics, which Valier noted when visiting the sacristy. Given the specific and relatively rare typology of these reliquaries, it would be unusual for him not to describe any of them in detail. A much more elaborate description of the liturgical equipment was provided by Agostino Valier during his visit of the Zadar Cathedral dedicated to Saint Anastasia. He paid special attention to the relics, which he did not analyze at all in Pula. According to his list of 28 relics with their containers, we can now recognize several objects that are exhibited at the permanent exhibition of religious art in Zadar. The items shown in this photograph aren't all from the Zadar Cathedral, but are part of the treasuries of churches throughout the entire Zadar Archdiocese. Reliquaries linked to those in Valier's list include the one of St. James de Marti from the early 12th century, associated with local Zadar goldsmith production. This one is on the left side. The reliquary of St. Mary Magdalene is also considered a local work and, based on the known circumstances of the commission, dates to 1332. Another one shaped like a head that can be connected to the Valier's list is the reliquary of St. Martha from the first half of the 14th century. Among other anthropomorphic reliquaries, the one of St. John the Baptist's forefinger is noteworthy, as it is believed to be crafted by Zadar goldsmiths active in the first half of the 14th century. The reliquary of the Holy Innocents, however, is associated with the Venetian goldsmiths known in art historical circles as the Maestro del Serpentino, active during the second quarter of the 14th century. It is also worth mentioning the reliquary, which is in the form of a chest that preserves the relics of Saint Chrysogonus and is dated to 1326, according to the inscription regarding the donors. In this presentation, I aim to offer a brief insight into the extensive information provided by Agostino Valier's apostolic visitation, which is essential for researching the church treasuries in Istria and Dalmatia. While the visitor may not have given equal attention to each cathedral and church, it is possible to assemble a general overview of the church's liturgical equipment by piecing together information, especially regarding the quantity of goldsmiths' items. Given the limited time for this presentation, I have included only 2 fragments of visitation records from the cathedrals in Pula and Zadar. However, I have also analyzed Valier's records for several more cathedrals in Istria and Dalmatia. I hope that my comparative analysis of these inventories, which I plan to write for the conference proceedings, will contribute to understanding the changes in church interiors after the Council of Trent. It will also shed light on objects that have not been preserved. However, we are aware of them thanks to Agostino Valier and his visitation record. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Yerman. As was previously announced, the next presentation will be online as well from Mr. Vukdautovic and University of Belgrade, the Belgrade Goldsmithing Guild Archival Sources, Master Goldsmiths and their 19th century silver objects. Yes? Mr. Daudovic, you are online.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Daudovic,
Hello
please.
to everybody. I was wondering, as Mateo said, what would happen if we have unlimited time to present. Okay, I will share my presentation. Just give me a second. Okay.
Okay, we can see the screen, yes.
Can you see the presentation?
You just have to make it on a slideshow, yes.
Okay.
It works.
Okay, you can see it now. Okay, good. Can I start?
Yes, please, Mr. Daudovic.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, it's great joy to join you even online. I wasn't able to come to Sofia, so my presentation is connected with Belgrade Goldsmithing Guild. And I will present you the main sources for the researching and generally dealing with this topic. First of all, Belgrade or Serbian goldsmithing art, very similar to Bulgaria, wasn't enough research in past 50 years, shall we say. Many diligent researchers during their field researching and other kind of stuff contribute with different findings, and generally through the publications of them, we had some sort of insight what is the main frame of Serbian goldsmithing. The main hypothesis in this were that the most of these silver objects, they are generally preserved nowadays in Serbian churches, were produced in Central Europe or Russia, and that we hadn't some special or developed national production in the term of producing of luxurious and crafted silver objects. So generally, the level of national goldsmithing art was quite unknown, and in past decades, I found in several, not only archives, but also private collections and other places, very valuable sources and documents. So it changed a lot the general insight and view of that topic, and generally what was the measure of development of Serbian goldsmithing guild. The main place where I found the most generally of my sources for researching this is the archive of Belgrade, and generally this institution collect various things connected, documents, personal data, all kind of sources connected with the city of Belgrade and Zemlin from 18th century to the nowadays. In archives are now we have kept the entire documents or books from the second half of 19th century. The main year which changed generally the method of production of silver objects and generally the organization was 1847, when in Serbian Principality was established the new law called ESNAF law, or a legislative regulation of work of different kind of production, called it in term you are familiar probably with, esnaf or roofnet. So first esnaf of the goldsmiths in Belgrade. It was the biggest city, of course, and the capital of the Serbian Principality in 19th century was established in 1850. So basically, from 1850, we can trace basically all the master goldsmiths who worked in Belgrade until the First World War. And this book is the most valuable archival source for the knowing of generally entire national production of silver and gold in both domains, profane domain and sacral, of course. And this book contains the names of the goldsmiths, and we can find also all kinds of very important data in this book. So we can trace them when they entered and received the master's title. How old were they? Then are they married or not? Do they have children or not? Where they are coming from? So we can trace, we can establish one proper network of all those people who worked in Belgrade in the second half of 19th century. Due to time restriction, I will just say that if we read this book very meticulously, we can find inside generally the circulation of people equally from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and from the Balkans, Bulgaria, Ottoman Empire, and the different cities. So the Belgrade goldsmithing scene in that period was very vivid, and I can say that people generally probably try to find better market for their work and to offer to the publicity what they know to produce. So even we had a lot of masters from the Tintar origin. Some of them came from Greece. So of course, the experience of the big Bulgarian silversmithing centers also was present, and that sort of exchange is something was certainly established in a broader way, Balkan visual culture as well the visual culture of the Principality of Serbia. The next book which is important is the book of apprentices, or more precise, journeymans. So they call it Kalfa, which we can trace also from 1853 to 1889. So we don't have only those who were master goldsmiths in Belgrade. We can trace also the people who learn how to produce silver objects, and then it's important that we can trace the pupils. We can establish some sort of schools or big goldsmithing centers, and we can trace how does it go. Of course, every of these young apprentices or journeymans were the actual pupil of some elder Belgrade famous goldsmith, and we have dates and even very precisely described phases of their work with exams, and for every final exam we have info what they have produced, like a golden ring with a black stone, or some spoon, or some piece of jewelry, or some cross, or whatever. So through that, we have a really good insight in the work of the Belgrade Goldsmith Guild from the second half of 19th century. These documents changed from the foundation our idea of that kind of artistic production in Serbia in 19th century, because most of the objects which we are dealing with now are not only the products of Central Europe or Russian Empire. They were produced in Belgrade. And many of these master goldsmiths were educated in Budapest or in Vienna. So they spend some of their artistic forming and learning the goldsmithing art in Central Europe. That's also very important info. Some of them, of course, were very foreign, like Toma Isidorovic from Kruševo, known as Toma Pentos Isidoru. He also worked, for example, in Bačkovo monastery, in many monasteries in the Mount of Athos, and he finally came to Serbia. He was maybe one of the most prominent goldsmithing artists from Balkans, who is, I think, generally, he was of the Cincar origin, someone who influenced in the same manner the goldsmithing art of Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, and later he went to Vienna. But through this book, we can also, they are important not only for the Serbian art history and national goldsmithing history, but we can connect and trace many goldsmith masters from all around the Balkans who worked and came in Belgrade in that period. Among many other data we have in this book, we have the third book. It's the book of master goldsmith from 1868. Then the ESNAF is organized in different way. So from 1868 we have a different sort of writing these data in the books. You can see also the stamp of Belgrade Goldsmithing Guild on the right side of this presentation. We have apprentices, of course, in this book. We have, again, those who were journeymen. So in these 6 books, we have basically the entire goldsmithing ESNAF in Serbia, in Belgrade. And we can say in Serbia because in many local communities, those master goldsmiths who were educated in Belgrade went to the smaller cities and worked there. So we can say through the sources of these books and through other field research results that everything what was worthy was first produced in Belgrade, and all those who were very good in their craftsmanship first learned this art in Belgrade, and later they move on to the different cities in Serbia. Some of them, of course, went to the Balkans, even Bulgaria or Ottoman Empire, and that exchange was something what characterized the second half of 19th century very much. But now I will give you one practical example. How does it work in, shall we say, in reality? The books are books, but they are quite helpful, and without the data and this information we could find in them, we could not work anyhow in the field of art history. We had a case of a certain goldsmith who was known in older Serbian publications as Master Stojic. We have basically in every Serbian cathedral church some of his works. He was the most prominent master goldsmith of the second half of the 19th century. Before I have found these archival sources, we only know that we had the best goldsmiths without name and only known as Master Stojic. Many of his works were found, and we were not sure was he some master goldsmith from Austro-Hungary or Austrian Empire, where he was born, educated, his origin, his personal data, etc., etc. So this is one of the examples of his work. And later on, I found in these books that last name Stoisiljević was mentioned, and somehow it light in my head that it could be that master goldsmith. Of course, in the archive we have also Belgrade archive. We have different varia documents, and I found among many papers application of apprentice Nikola Stoisiljević to the Belgrade city administration for admission to the title of master of silversmithing and entering to the guild as master from 1859 with two hand signatures of this master goldsmith. One censer from the Brankovina church was donated to the church as the votive gift of Princess Persida Karađorđević in 1857, and in some scriptures of Branko Vujović I found that there is mentioned among other hallmarks of this censer that there is also a name Nikola. So his hypothesis was the name of the master Stoic was Nikola. So I went there to the Brankovina and found the censer. So the hand signature of Nikola Stoisiljević was the same as the hallmarks of this on that censer, and only the reason of the too long last name, you can see his last name is Stoisiljević, and it's even inscribed in Church Slavonic or Slaveno-Srpski, which was in use in 19th century in Serbia. So Stoic is the abbreviation of his too long last name. So Nikola Stoic is the master Nikola Stoisiljević. It goes like that. In many cathedrals and churches after that, all those findings connected with the unknown master Stoic now are enlightened. Who was master Stoic? He entered in the guild in 1859. He was born in Užice. It's one of the cities in Western Serbia. During the part of his master crafting art in Budapest. So he's Serbian, and certainly he was somebody who was very well known with that what the Balkan cultural model is. So he traveled from Principality of Serbia sometime, of course, of his life to Hungary, learn goldsmithing art there, and then come to Belgrade. And he was very skillful master, because in 1857 he produced the censer for Princess Persida. Just to have some clear picture who she was, she committed a silver casket for the remains of the medieval king Stephen I crowned in the monastery of Studenica from the first and the main Habsburg goldsmith, Wenzel Johann Svoboda, who was the personal goldsmith and court goldsmith of Habsburg Emperor in 1853. This is the most luxurious silver object made in Serbia in the middle of 19th century, and certainly the masterpiece of Austrian Habsburg goldsmithing from that time. So she was very rich, and she could afford herself whatever basically she wanted. So she chose probably Master Stoisiljević as somebody who was very skillful and good in his craftsmanship. So this is also one of the important informations. And all different objects we find during the field research now are the network, and it changed not for a little the picture of Serbian national goldsmithing and some broader historical circumstances in the second half of 19th century. On the end, I will conclude I also found in one private collection this picture, because the descendants of the Stoisiljević family are still alive, and luckily they have these goldsmiths have grandchildren, and in their family they had some small silver objects like spoons made by their grandfather, of course with the same hallmark. And this is the photograph of the master goldsmith Nikola Stoisiljević. That this is the oldest person on the picture, with this bowler hat, with 3 of his sons. They also trade with clocks later in the beginning of 20th century, and from one shop in Belgrade they were basically the most prominent masters. You can see in these glass casing how many different objects were produced. Of course, they were sellers. They produced gold. They produced silver. But as we know from many objects, really many objects in different Serbian churches and cathedrals, we can assume, of course, we have some private collections, even museum ones, with some profane things like traces or some candlesticks, etc., that all these objects were produced in Belgrade in their workshop. So it changed a lot, a view of Serbian way of living, private life, public presentation, all those things connected with the private public, and the use of silverware as some marks of self-presentation, because all these objects were produced in Serbia by Serbian masters, goldsmiths. Example of Nikola Stoisiljević is one example. We, of course, have many different similar examples, and through the archival sources, objects themselves, and we can say different other third sort of sources, we can make quite precise history with precise dates, establishing networks, and especially something what is going around the Balkans, and we can trace the mutual connections and the influences through that. Thank you very much. I must stay in my time. It was, I think, and again, I regret very much because I'm not in Sofia to chat with everybody on the border of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davutovic. And now we're heading towards the last presentation of this morning panel. The speaker requires no presentation whatsoever. It's my pleasure, our pleasure and privilege to give the floor to Margarita. She will speak once again on hero monk Neophytos Rutis.
I will begin my paper by mentioning again Gabriel Millet, as was done at the opening of our conference. Millet's work lies at the beginnings of modern art history, and through his studies, extensive collections of data, and innovative for that time photo documentation, he casts light on numerous Eastern Orthodox monuments covering vast material. It was exactly Millet who first touched upon the name of Neophytos Rutis in his book on the Mount Athos inscriptions, while rendering the signature on the triptych icon from 1616, kept in the Vatopedi monastery. However, in the same book, Millet omitted for some reason an inscription carved by the same Neophytos on the base of the iconostasis cross from the Prototon monastery, and reproduced only the inscription with the year 1611 on the upper part of that base. More than 60 years later, Mirjana Čorović-Ljubinković published a drawing of this missing part without explanation for its source and without any interpretation. Thus, besides the year of creation of the wood-carved iconostasis from the Prototon monastery, that was mentioned by Mie, the name of its master was also revealed. There is a curious detail in Chorovich-Lubinkovic's text. While speaking of Neophytos, she quoted Mie's book, where such information was obviously non-existent. While the reasons behind this are interesting, other aspects of her research deserve more attention. First, there were some minor omissions in her reading, which resulted in partial disclosure of the information given in descriptions about Neophytos. Thus, Chorovich-Lubinkovic identifies him as a monk and doesn't mention his last name, probably because she was unable to see the inscription well due to the quality of the photograph she used. Regardless of these omissions, it was Chorovich-Lubinkovic who, for the first time, more thoroughly analyzed the characteristics of Neophytos' iconostasis, creating an image of him as a talented artist who successfully inserted selected Western details into the Orthodox tradition of wood-carved iconostasis. Afterwards, all the scholars associated the hero monk Neophytos with the wood-carved iconostasis made for the Catholicon of the Prototon monastery in 1611, and praised him, his elaborate technique, the innovations and compositional elements, and decorative motifs. Because of the quality of the craftsmanship, the Prototon Templum is considered as a model for the next generations of master carvers, and it's therefore considered as well as a turning point in the development of the wood-carved iconostasis from Mount Athos. As can be seen from the next slide, today the Neophytos masterpiece is not in place anymore in the Catholicon of the Prototon monastery, but one can get the impression of its characteristics from a watercolor drawing published in Gabriel Mie's book on the paintings of Athos monuments. It reveals that in the first decades of the 20th century, the Great Cross, with its base and the inscriptions mentioned above, together with the Lepira, still surmounted the Prototon iconostasis. Visual information for the lower parts of the iconostasis is provided also by a photo in Lubinkovic's study. Probably in the 60s or the 70s, the parts of Neophytos' iconostasis were dismantled and moved for storage and exhibition in the monastery's subsidiary compartments. A precise reading of the author's signature on the Prototon iconostasis was made by Nikos Nikononos for the catalogue of the exhibition Treasures of the famous one, Treasures of Mount Athos at the Museum of Byzantine Culture, Thessaloniki, 1997. Obviously, having a chance to work with the object, the visu, and in a close distance, he corrected the rank of Neophytos and disclosed his family name, Rutis. Shortly after, Ioannis Stavlakis made a considerable step forward in the knowledge about this master. In his article on the old wood-carved iconostasis of the Vatopedi monastery, Stavlakis compared the inscriptions from the iconostasis at the Prototon monastery and from a polyptych icon at the Vatopedi monastery, which match in detail, and concluded that the icon was made by Neophytos Rutis. This icon was the same mentioned at the beginning of my presentation as documented by Mie because of its inscription with the Neophytos name, but it took almost a century to make the connection between the two artifacts. The icon in question is of a specific type, known in the scholarship as Brebion, Varevion, Paresia, or Prothesis icon. These icons contain the names of the deceased and of the living donors of each church, which were inscribed in different groups and were used for commemoration during the Divine Liturgy in the proscomedy, and due to their use, they were often placed in the prothesis. Apart from the Paresia from the Vatopedi monastery, in an article from 2006, Tavlakis attributed convincingly one more prothesis icon to Neophytos, a triptych from the Duchiario monastery made in 1615 and also signed by the master. Thus, he convincingly proved that Neophytos worked not only on the large scale of iconostasis, but also executed smaller commissions. It has to be said that in this earlier article, Tavlakis extended the list of Neophytos' works, making a proposition that the cross of the old iconostasis of the Vatopedi monasteries Catholicon, as well as a wood-carved stool kept in the same monastery, were also created by him. As Dimitrios Liakos showed recently, there are no sustainable arguments for such an attribution. Yet, the list of the works of the hieromonk Neophytos Routis can be supplemented. In the period 2017-2020, large-scale work was being carried out on the digitization project that aims to explore and document the rich, complex, and remarkable historical and cultural heritage on Mount Athos in Greece. Within the framework of this project, several highly valuable electronic catalogs were created, among them a catalog of icon collections stored in the various monasteries of Mount Athos. A large part of this digitized icon collection was accessible via the internet through the Athos Digital Heritage Repository during 2020 and 2021. Sadly, some changes have been made in the last years that complicated open access to the results of this project. Among the artifacts published on the website and available for viewing in 2021, there were several prothesis icons that differ by their provenance and dating. Two of them are of particular interest for the research on Neophytos Routis. The digital item number of the first one is 00365, and it is a part of the collection of the Stavronikita monastery. It is a polyptych prothesis icon, on the central part of which Christ, the Mother of God, and Saint Nicholas are depicted in a deisis composition. Below there is a carved inscription with the date 1607 and the name of the master Neophytos. The technical, compositional, stylistic characteristics and the signature allow this icon to be attributed to Neophytos Routis, which is done not by me. It is entered as this in the electronic catalog. The technical composition, the same goes to another paresia from the same digital database, this time without date and author's name. Its number is 00167 and it belongs to the Pantocrator monastery. The paresia icons made by Neophytos for the Duchiario monastery, for the Vatopedi monastery, and the one from the Pantocrator monastery were obviously not used by the monastic brotherhoods. The paresia made for the Stavronikita monastery in 1607 contains only several names. This is not the case with the last known to me prothesis icon made by Neophytos Routis, which apparently was in use for some period of time, as is obvious by numerous names inscribed in it. This is a triptych paresia in relatively good condition, which is now kept in the collection of the National Church Historical and Archaeological Museum in Sofia. It is already published in the catalogue of the icons from the museum, which was issued by the Institute of Art Studies in the beginning of this year. Therefore, I will not dwell on its stylistic and iconographical characteristics, and will mention here only the most important details, namely the author's inscription, curved in a manner typically for neophytos on the external part of the wing that also contain a date, 16, 13, or 14. This object is the first testimony that Hieromonk Neophytos had connections with monasteries outside Mount Athos. The holy place for which he made this parousia cannot be identified with certainty. The condition of the inscriptions is not good. Some of them are illegible or erased, and no toponyms or names of monasteries have been found in the preserved fragments so far. I will use here the opportunity to thank again to my colleague Tsvetan Vasilev, who worked on the inscriptions. Several names of living monks are recorded in the third column of the left wing: Pancratius, Theophylact, Procopius, and according to the description in the inventory book of the museum, the names of the bishop Dionysius and priest Thomas were read in the second column of the same wing. Today they are lost. It is important to note that here we have an early example of the presence of guild organizations, Rufets, as a separate group of donors. The guilds have been among the major benefactors of churches and monasteries since the 17th century. According to the museum's inventory book, the prothesis icon was sent from Xanthi to Sofia during the Balkan War by Metropolitan Boris Ohridsky. The research of Lisbeth Ljubanova showed that this probably happened in 1913, while Western Thrace was administered by Bulgarian civil and ecclesiastical authorities. It was kept in the collection of the Holy Synod until the establishment of the museum, which happened in 1922. It is possible that this prothesis icon belonged to one of the two large monasteries near Xanthi, the monastery of Panagia Archangeliotisa and the nearby monastery of Panagia Kalamo. More than 40 manuscripts from these monasteries are kept today in the library of the Ecclesiastical, Historical and Archival Institute in Sofia, and their full description is published by Dorotei Getov in the second volume of his catalogue of the Greek manuscripts in the Institute. Number 467 of these manuscripts is a parousia of the monastery of Panagia Archangeliotisa from 1548 or 9, studied separately by Christos Seraphimidi. Most of the manuscripts date from the 16th and a couple of them are from the 17th century. So far, in all of these, no traces have been found either of the names that are preserved in the prothesis icon from Xanthi, probably, nor of Neophytos Routis. This is a matter, I think, of further investigation, which our Greek colleagues, I suppose, will surely conduct. The series of 5 parousia that were at the center of the present paper testifies to the narrow specialization of a single master in the making of such a specific type of icon that has no analog in the artistic heritage of the time period studied to date. Nevertheless, the figure of the hieromonk Neophytos Routis raises more questions than gives answers, and it deserves further research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margareta. Thank you. Big thank you to all the speakers, both here in the room and in the online. We are running a bit late, but I think we do still time for questions. So this time the floor belongs to the audience. Because I'm very tall, I will stand up so that I can see you.
About the church of in Budaku de Jos, it was apparently it was built as a Latin church. Then it was when the local Saxon community was converted to Lutheranism. It became a Lutheran church, and then how it happened that it became again a Catholic church. This is my question, because the Saxons, the local Saxons, remained till 20th century. They remained Lutherans.
It not became a Catholic again. It became an Orthodox church. Because Saxon,
so in the legend, in the legend I read Lutheran, Catholic, and Orthodox.
Yes, Orthodox.
So the order is Catholic,
yes,
Lutheran,
and Orthodox.
And Orthodox. Yes.
Because in the original Kistitsa, Germans left 1950s, and their churches became.
Yes. One of my professors in Paris was a Saxon from Transylvania, Professor Karol Heitz. He doesn't live anymore. He was a specialist in Romanesque architecture. And the second question, in some Transylvanian Lutheran churches, the altar, the palad altar, the altarpiece, it was repainted in some cases when I know at least one case, but I don't remember the name of the church. It was a big late Gothic crucifixion. It was repainted, and then they left only the crucifix, and there were inscriptions from donators or even from Bible. I don't remember anymore. There is a book about this.
So-called Schrift altar.
Schrift altar.
This is the transformation of Catholic altarpiece in
a Lutheran. How many cases are there for this repainting? About more than 10 or?
This one you are quoting is from Sibiu.
From Sibiu, yes.
And
the most known.
It was established in 1519. It was originally painted. In 1545 it was transformed in a Schrift altar.
Schrift altar.
And it is one of the earliest such altars
and there are
all around Europe.
Do we know? My question is: do we know names of painters that repainted, that transformed the Catholic altarpiece to a Lutheran altarpiece?
Yes, we have the name. Benedictus Victor was him, and he was trained as in the Catholic time, and afterwards he was employed by the municipality to
Protestantize the Catholic pictures. Yes. And did he convert to Protestantism himself?
Well, in 1545. Sibiu became Lutheran by municipality decree.
Yes, eius legio cuius religio.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So even himself, he became the Catholic painter, became forcibly Lutheran. Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions?
Thank you. I thank all the speakers for the presentation. They were wonderful. And I have a question and also a remark for Gregory Mamopoulos. The term pan. I think it might come from Jupan. That means sir. I mean, we have Polish, which means sir, something like that. It's common in our Romanian texts and in Moldavia and also in Wallachia.
You are talking now about the origin of the word or the use in the
use as sir, pan.
But in the document that you showed in the other documents, he is a ban Arsenio. He is sitting as a judge. And the 24 warnings are coming and they are sworn in front of him, and he is judging the case and he issues a decision. So this, I think, is the ban-like
Banus was the nickname also of Fanariot in 18th century. Now has Banus. He was a Karadzas family, and his nickname was Banus. And he traveled to Western Europe.
Probably I don't know the case, but probably he would be a dignitary in the principality. You don't take a nickname.
Probably. He had
It's like saying today,
I don't you describe some Rococo tableau, some Rococo decoration from Western and Central Europe. It is methods.
Maybe, but in this case, the coincidence is very big. You have only one person that is named Ban Arsenio. He is in 3 documents, I think, sitting like a judge. He has authority.
Yes.
He has authority. He's and in the 4th document, he's still I don't know what this year.
So Banos means.
No, Ban is from Jupan. It's
Jupan.
like sir. And
Yeah.
it's
It's
used
an abbreviation of Jupan.
Jupan. And it's commonly used in
But
our
in the oldest inscription, it's clearly written Banos in Greek. M-P-A-N-O-S.
Why we call Banos the both? Because the two of the relatives that they donated the church, they are both named Panos.
I don't know if it was clear in my presentation. The people in 1645 did not know what the person that is on the inscription of 1587 was. They read Banus Arsenis, Kektitor, this Ke, and
so
it means that there are two capacities in this person. He is Ban and he is also Ktitor, donor of the church. Okay, they read this, they didn't understand, in my opinion, in our opinion, what does this mean? So he took what was, it's called folk etymology. They took what was in his ear of the painters, of the donor of 1645. He took this word and he made it Panos, a name, because it was similar. His name also was
very
Panos.
good explanation.
Yeah, this is the only explanation.
Coincidence that in Romanian inscriptions, in Black inscriptions, they use also Pan as Jupan as sir. It's just a coincidence. Okay, maybe.
I don't know the Romanian inscriptions, but here now the inscriptions are in Greek. We are in a totally different environment.
Yeah, but this is my question.
Yes.
Related to this remark. How you consider in ethnical terms those people? So they would be what?
I won't fall for trick questions in the Balkan conference. I don't know.
Since they all moved the time in
I don't
Moldavia, they are related with the Moldavian.
I don't think it mattered to them.
Boyars and so
It would be very nice if one of them sit down and wrote, I feel very
Romania today.
Today. Later maybe I will feel Turkish. I'll see. Finish entry of law, but we don't have this kind of thing.
You understand, it's not a tricky question.
Yes,
something in the roses.
I will repeat it now. The most important thing. Ad nauseam used. Okay, the main thing for the Balkans at this time was the religion, because the Ottomans wanted it so, and because I don't know, it was a stronger bond. Okay, people would also identify as something else as well. But this something else. I don't know how it interested me. But I don't know. We should not. I would not fall in this. I was very careful not to use modern terms. I don't. I use geographical terms and.
Yes.
I don't know. I can't tell you whatever. There are people that are named Ginus, Gimp. I mean, you should jump and say he is Albanian par excellence. But everything that he's writing is in Greek. So, but what should I say? As a Greek, I should say he is Greek beyond Greeks because he writes 10,000 pages. He's but his name is Gim. What should I do with some, I don't know, somebody that is writing the manuscript in Slavonic, but his name is, all these examples are fictional, and his name is Porphyrios. I should say he is a Greek, his name is Porphyrios, but he is right Slavonic.
We can't judge all these elements according to modern terms. Modern periods.
People can have multiple identities.
From generation to generation, to Wallachia, to Moldavia.
Okay, but
yes, every language has, but we know that Zetirovic was actually Black, not
Yes, this is another problem, especially with inscriptions. People read inscriptions today, and because a word in the inscription of that time sounds something like they heard of today, they think that what today is, the meaning of today, we can impose it in the meaning of 300 years ago. This is also not the case. We should check what was happening there and try to confine ourselves from today. I mean, today is very dangerous in our science. We should not think with today what was happening 300 years ago.
For example,
And the even bigger problem is that some people get something from the 19th century, where nation states had emerged. There were different ideologies, thankfully, ideologies that now we can trace and read about and understand. And then they take this because the people in the 19th century were also writing about the 17th century. And they take this and they put it back in the 17th century, which is also not true. They tell you, no, you ask me for some old source and give you something from 19th century. And then you again fall in the same thing. And the same goes for the 18th and the 17th. So we should never take something from later and take it back.
Amen to that.
We Greeks are jumping.
We haven't even reached the wine break. Imagine like what would happen like after that.
I have one comment also for my colleague Isabella. Actually, there are three of the icons from the hierarchy church preserved. There are the other two, the Mother of God with Child and Christ Pantocrator. They are in the repository of the Metropolitanate of Moldavia. So they are three. I don't know if they were four initially. Maybe they would be only three. We don't know how the iconoclastic would look. But for sure, the three of them, they are still present.
They are accessible. They are not accessible.
I can show you pictures. I saw them.
You are doing the deposits.
Yes, yes. And another comment, I also worked on that letters, and in my opinion, the craftsman, the person that was sent by Vasile Lupu to Moscow, actually, I think he was the carver, because all those icons, they have a carved part. And it's logical that the Moldavian tradition here appears in the letters because these carved backgrounds that are not
specific requirements about the sculpture of the iconostasis, how the cross should be made.
The
cross was very similar.
But it was also a painter in the envoy.
No, but the painter, I checked the date. The painter Nicolae sent 1 year later than the icons they turned to Moldavia. So the guy that was the first craftsman is not named. And after that, in 41, he sent Nicolae with the other, the monk Spiridonus, or the adult Salvati, it's another name. That was also written, but this happened a year later than the icons come to Moldavia. He received the icons, and after that, he sent the Nicolae. So we should check, but I will show you the icons.
Thank you very much. See you.